might makes right. But what does this mean? Does it mean, for example, that the strong will always beat the weak? Does it mean that brain is always better than brawn? Does it mean, for example, that an archer going up against a swordsman will have more might? Does it make him right? Or what if the swordman stares down the arrow, eye to eye, tight, dodges it, and then, even then, he goes on the attack to actually surprise the archer himself? What if he had armor on? Does the archer have more might than the swordsman, or does the knight have more might than the archer? It's all very confusing. In these circumstances, they can both prove the saying. This is Thucydides, otherwise known as the father of scientific history. He has many achievements under his belt. Some of his accolades include general, historian, and he wrote a book called The History of the Peloponnesian War. And he lost the war that the book was about, and they exiled him for it. Or maybe it was for something else. And that's about it. Within the book, there's a quote in which he says, right, as the world goes, is only in question between equals in power, while the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. Can't say I disagree with him, but he wasn't the only classical mind to think such things. Our boy, Plato, in fact, also wrote such a thesis on the topic. He, being a philosopher, had a lot to say. He wrote The Republic. He founded the Platonist school of thought, founded the Academy, first higher learning institution in the Western world. I wonder what tuition was like. And then he got roasted by a homeless man. In the book, or The Republic, a character known as Thrasymachus goes on to say this: listen then, I say, justice is nothing other than what is advantageous for the stronger. And I can't say I agree with him on that. But why did I tell you all this? Why did I show you these pictures? What's my goal here? To give you a picture of the mindset of some of the top minds in the classical age and some of the differences between that age and the modern age. From the classical age, you can see that the term is connected to warfare and power. And this is all very interesting once you compare it with modern contemporaries. For instance, this is Aiden Ballou. Lived from 1803 to 1890. He was one of the first Americans and people who speak the English language to ponder the phrase might makes right in a modern setting. He was a very interesting man with a lot of accolades. He was a abolitionist, restorationist, anarchist, pacifist, and a socialist who espoused ideas of using religion, specifically Christianity, and nonviolence to go against the government to establish a anarcho-socialist commune called Hopedale. Interesting man. But putting all that aside, he gave us a nice quote, and it was the following. But now, instead of discussion and argument, brute force rises up to the rescue of discomfited error and crushes truth and right into the dust. Which, given our modern landscape, I would agree with.
Bring him up. How fucking get is out! Help your customer. Fuck off! Fuck off!
But enough about that. This is someone else. His name is William Pepperell Montague. And he was a philosopher of the New Realist School, who was a professor who taught for a long time. He coined the term critocracy, meaning a government based on coercive power by those strong enough to seize control through physical violence or demagogic manipulation, usually for dictatorships or totalitarian regimes, etc. In essence, that makes right. We're talking about Caesar, Napoleon, or MJ. There's a lot of people who were in the right place at the right time to take power. But even talking about this can cause a whole debate. Like, it's something to really debate. Might makes right. I don't think it's a debate. I think it's true. But it is what it is. But I'll give you an example. Abraham Lincoln, a contemporary of Aiden Ballou, says, "Let us have faith that right makes might. And in that faith, let us to the end dare to do our duty as we understand it. whereas Lucius Annaeus Seneca, you could say, is a contemporary of Thucydides and Plato, but ahead a few centuries. Successful crime is dignified with the name of virtue. The good become the slaves of the impious. Might makes right. Fear silences the power of the law. This debate honestly just reminds me of something else in our current society, but whatever. I'll give you some examples. For instance, Alexander the Great, this guy, when he marched up against the Persian king, Darius III, he was going up against a behemoth of a machine. And Darius, he didn't know yet, but he was fucked. You see, this massive empire, look at those nice borders, was reduced chip by chip all the way down by Alexander, even though it might have been better for the people living within that empire to not have to deal with that and would have rather preferred the peace and Persian rule, but it's whatever. The aftermath was basically this. He embarked on all of this basically because he wanted to in the eyes of his father, but in the end, it destabilized the whole empire and its lands, leading to a lot more wars and conflict and chaos for the people living within those lands, even for his own people. In the end, might made right. He did what he could because he had the might, but was it right? Who knows? Another example is the Second Boer War. The war began October 11th in 1899, following a Boer ultimatum that the British should cease building up their forces in the region. The Boers had refused to grant political rights to non-Boer settlers, known as Uitlanders, most of whom were British, or to grant civil rights to Africans. And during the Second Boer War, when the British Empire was expanding its reach into Africa, they had issues in South Africa with the Zulu and Boer forces. Basically surrounded and up against the strongest empire at the time, though, the Boers were screwed. Though putting up a hard fight, which was able to at least remove the air of invincibility from the Brits, they eventually went down in defeat. If their African allies, either switching sides, murdered or interned in concentration camps, along with their women and children, no less, they had no choice but to go to the negotiating table and surrender to the British. And that's not even mentioning the technological differences between the Boer and the British, who the British also had more resources and manpower than the Boers. And all of this led to just a giant brawl between both sides. One side fighting for their new homeland and one side fighting to expand their empire. And that's not even mentioning the victims in all this conflict. Not only the soldiers dying on the battlefield, but the women and children, usually Boer, would be put on concentration camps, fenced away from their society, undergoing severe malnourishment, beatings, and other atrocities, along with their African allies that would either support the Boer or British. And all of this just led to a big mess, which if you search on Google, just the Boer War, you look down, you'll see that it's, yeah, bad. How about this? How about you're a kid and you're being disciplined by a parent, guardian, or caretaker because you did something bad that you weren't supposed to do, and they respond by taking away maybe your game, your phone, or just beating the shit out of you in an attempt to discipline you to stop it. And in that case, well, might makes right. They have the power over you to do that. It's the same thing in school sometimes. If you're getting physically bullied by a kid that's maybe bigger than you, or socially bullied by a girl that's maybe more popular than you, same rules apply. I remember being a kid in school and just witnessing some of the stupid shit that was just going on around me, be it fights, arguments, beefs, all the petty shit. But in the end, the same thing always happened. The bully, the one that antagonized it, can't really be stopped because the school is always just supervisory. They probably have some sort of like zero tolerance policy rule in which they can't get involved in. So they just kind of stand there watching. Like they know that that student is causing the issue and that the other student isn't. And they just kind of stand there taking it all in, and then they proceed to do nothing but fuck off. Because in the end, they can't really do anything. And the bully is just free reign to terrorize other people while the one who's the victim just has to deal with it. In the end, might made right, because the victim or the weak in the scenario would not have the ability to stand up for themselves or to be able to defend themselves in a way that wouldn't backfire on them due to the zero tolerance policy. And in the end, that just proves the rule correct. Thank you all for watching.